tonight's Bible reading comes from the book of John, chapter 18, verses 19 to 24, and then we'll have a second section, which we'll get to afterwards, and I'll let you know when we jump to that one. So give you a moment if you have your Bible on your phone or in person to find that. So John chapter 18, verses 19 to 24. All right. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Okay, we're going to skip down to verse 28, and then we're going to go to chapter 19, verse 16. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no bias for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, May. What did Pilate say? "This is your king," he said to the Jews. For the first time in the Gospel of John, the entire story of Jesus that we've been working our way through for like 2 and a bit years now, on and off. For the first time in tonight's reading, we finally saw Jesus wearing a crown, right? King Jesus finally wearing royal robes and a crown, and yet not at all in the situation that some would have expected leading up to this reading. I don't know how you guys feel about kings. Our particular king, who knows the name of our current king? Charles the what? What number? I don't even know. You could say anything. No, he won't even care. He's not even powerful enough. I wouldn't say something against the president of China because it might be heard, but I'll say anything about King Charles, right? Because honestly, the king really means pretty much nothing to us, right? Here in Australia, we have a king, sure. I think he has more power here in Australia than he has back in England, which is really just says a lot about how little power our king has, right? Kings don't really mean much to us these days, and so I think we kind of forget what it means for someone to be king, right? Because to be a king is just to be the guy who one day eventually might get his head stamped on our coins. Like, he's still not even on our coins, right? King Charles means nothing to me, so it's easy to think kings don't matter. But we talk about Jesus being our king. Like Pilate said tonight, "Here is your king." We talk about Jesus as our king. And when we talk about that, we don't just mean like a distant person whose face is on our coins but means nothing to us, right? When we talk about Jesus being our king, we mean like king in the fullest sense of that. Someone who represents us, someone who leads us, someone who we obey, someone who we like bow the knee to and say, "I will honor you, I will worship you, you have my allegiance, you have my life," right? We mean it in that like medieval sense when we talk about Jesus being our king. And so tonight, as we look at the first passage where Jesus wears a crown, as we see Jesus the King on paper for the first time in some ways, we're going to consider who King Jesus is. What kind of king is he? And as we see what kind of king he is, we're going to consider, why is he a king worth bowing the knee to? Why is he a king who deserves our allegiance? And if he is, what impact is that going to have on our lives? The way we're going to do that was quite a long reading, right? But we wanted to honor Jesus by reading out what happened to him. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through like 6 little glimpses, 6 different things that happened in that passage that hopefully you guys will remember some of them. For each of them, we're going to look at a different aspect of Jesus as king. Here's the way it'll play out. See if I can... There we go. Wonderful. Up on the screen. Here's what we're going to ask. We're going to have a quick look at a couple of verses. And we're going to say, what just happened? Right? What did we read? What did May read out for us? Why does it matter that happened? Why does it matter that that's the kind of king that Jesus is? We're going to think then, how does that impact us? Well, the first thing we're going to think is, what's it look like to appreciate that about Jesus? We don't want to jump straight to, like, what should I do tomorrow about, like, how does it impact me? We want to just step back and be like, how do we appreciate that truth about our King? What does that mean for us? Right? And then we're going to think, and what does it look like for us to be like our King? What does it look like for us to imitate him? So we're going to follow that rhythm, right? Jump through 6 different things, looking at a different aspect of Jesus as King, saying, what does the Bible tell us? Why does that matter? How can we appreciate Jesus? How can we imitate Jesus? You guys got that? If anyone's writing notes, that's going to be super simple for you. And let me give you a tip. When you get to your small groups, you're going to want to remember what are the 6. And it'd be great if you remembered some of that rhythm of like, what happened? Why does it matter? How can we appreciate it, and how can we imitate it? So if you're taking notes on your phone, that's fine. If you've got a booklet there, that's excellent. Let's get into it. Our first one that we're going to look at, and if you remember right back to the start of the reading, you would have seen this. We're going to look at Jesus, the dignified King. Jesus, the dignified King. Here's where we're going for that one. This is right back in chapter 18. Here's what we read in verse 22. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded, to the true high priest, right? Jesus' response. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" This little scene blows me away. Like when I was listening to it earlier today, I was reading it over the last couple of days, This blows me away because if I'm doing nothing wrong and someone slaps me in the face, my reaction is not to stay cool, calm, and collected, right? What is it? What just happened for Jesus? He's doing nothing wrong. He's just answering the questions truthfully. He gets slapped for no reason, and his response is to stay self-controlled, stay poised, have dignity, and say, what is it that I did wrong? Why did you slap me? And if I did nothing wrong, why did you hit me? Right? That matters for who Jesus is. Because as a king, it would normally be in a moment like that where somebody disrespects you, what would you do? What would any other king do if they were disrespected and someone slapped them? Off with their head, right? Wouldn't being in a position of power normally mean if somebody does an injustice to us, we take it out on them. We fight back. That's if we're a king. Most of us aren't kings or queens in the room. But the same thing sits in our hearts, doesn't it? That if somebody does an injustice to you, slaps you in the face when you don't deserve it. Take that probably metaphorically though, right? Someone hurts you in a way that you don't deserve. When that happens, with family, school, workplace, wherever it is, what normally comes out of our heart in that moment? When injustice is done to us? Like instant rage? Overreacting? What I think is actually kind of compensating because we feel really powerless, right? So we feel frustrated that they would do that injustice to us, so we arc up and we fire back, right? Isn't that most of us' response here? Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus didn't need to flex his power here, right? He gets called out about how he responds to the high priest. He is the true high priest. He is the Son of God. But he doesn't need to flex his power in this situation. Why? Because Jesus here is actually fully secure in who he is, and he's on a mission. That mission goes back like at least 700 years. Really, it goes back thousands of years. It goes back into eternity. But if we rolled back about 700 years from here, there was a prophecy that was made about the person who would save God's people. And what did it say about the person who would bring salvation to God's people? He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Jesus was on a mission here. And so when injustice was done to him, he held his dignity, maintained self-control. Rather than arcing up and flexing, he stuck to the mission that God had given him. And I just think it's worth noticing and appreciating that, first of all, that we have a king who doesn't feel a need to rage, to overcompensate for some powerlessness, to defend his own ego. That actually we have a king who is willing to humble himself and be slapped by a nobody and take a deep breath and engage calmly and patiently for the sake of the salvation that he was going to bring to us. It's a wonderful thing to honor in him. What does it look like to imitate him then? If he's our king, and so we want to not just appreciate him but imitate him, a couple of places where he himself, actually this first one, gave us a picture of what it looks like. If he's your king, this is what he calls us to. Jesus says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Some of you might have heard that saying, either in church or even outside of church, turn the other cheek. It started with Jesus. And not only did he say it at the start of his ministry, even on the worst day of his life, where he was betrayed and now a false trial and about to be tortured and murdered, when someone slapped him, he didn't slap back. He was dignified, patient, and calm. And so as the dignified king, though he was struck unjustly, Jesus didn't feel the need to respond with insecure anger and rage, but instead with calm self-control and dignity. And then he calls us as his followers to repay no one else evil for evil, but to repay evil with goodness and kindness and patience. That's the first one, the dignified king. There's many more. Next one we're going to have a look at. That's all right, that one says the same thing. Do not repay evil for evil. The next one we're going to have a look at is Jesus the innocent king. If you're listening to the reading, you would have noticed this one come up a bunch of times on the way through, but let me show you some of the verses so that you can go back and look at them later if you want to. Pilate came out at the beginning. Jesus has just been brought in and says, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" If he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you, is their response, right? Is that what Pilate asked? Pilate asked, what are the charges? What are the charges? They don't have any, right? So what do they say? Basically, trust us Pilate, he is a bad dude, just kill him. That's their legal argument. Right from the start, they don't actually have any charges to be bringing against Jesus. A little while later, Pilate comes out. It says, with this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. Jesus is in the actual highest legal court, basically the Supreme Court of ancient Israel, right? The highest ruler in the land is the judge over his case. The legal case has been made, and he says there is no basis for a charge against him. A little while later, we're into chapter 19 now. Pilate came out, said to the Jews gathered there, look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I find no basis for a charge against him. The chief priests, their officials, saw him. They shouted, crucify, crucify. But Pilate said, you take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. You guys picking this up? Jesus had done nothing wrong and was repeatedly declared innocent. The only comeback that the Jews had, the Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Right? A claim which deserves death if it's not true. And the Jews didn't want to accept that it might be true. But Jesus, in a legal court, the highest legal court of his day, was repeatedly declared innocent, 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 innocent. And that matters, right? That he is being declared innocent, because this is so much more than even just him being innocent before the Roman laws. He stood before a worldly authority, and that judge said, innocent, innocent, innocent. More than that, Jesus could stand before his Father, the God of the universe. And you know, not just regarding Roman law, but all sin in his life, what we're told in Scripture, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22 says, he committed no sin. Can you wrap your mind around what that must be? Not just to be declared innocent by Pilate. Like, I don't know, if you were just dragged into some random thing by the police and they investigated everything in your life trying to find anything you'd done wrong, like you'd probably be declared innocent by the laws of Australia, maybe not all of us. But that he actually could be declared innocent for every moment of his life, every thought that he ever had, every desire he ever had, any word he ever spoke, any deed he ever did, that in 33 years of his life, there was not a single thing that the holy, perfect God of the universe could fault him for. Can you imagine what it would be like? For what that took from him. Like that self-control, that love for the Father, the amount of things he was tempted but said no to, because the book of Hebrews says he was tempted, like we are. And yet he went through every single moment of his life in absolute obedience to God. Innocent, 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 innocent. And that really matters for us, because he needed to be qualified as the one who could then take our place, so that when we swap with him, we get declared innocent. If he was just another guilty guy, then him dying 2,000 years ago doesn't mean much, even if he said some cool things. He needed to qualify himself to swap with us and leave us innocent. And so we need to appreciate that, right? We want to stop and appreciate how big a deal it is that Jesus went through 30-something years of temptation like we go through, and at every single point chose obedience to the Father, lived an absolutely blameless, spotless life. Why? So he could give it as a gift to you. Because if he sinned even once and then gifted that to you, you'd still be a sinner before God. The only chance for us to stand before God, not guilty, is for Jesus to go through his entire life, not guilty. And so it's a wonderful thing that we worship the innocent King. Not just that we appreciate him. What's the second thing? We want to appreciate, then we want to imitate. Paul writes to the Philippian church that we want to be children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation that shine like stars in the sky. What is it that we're called to if we are subjects of and worshippers of the innocent King? That we would do the same. That empowered by his Spirit out of obedience to his word, we might live like him. He was declared innocent by Pilate. Jesus was the spotless lamb who could take our place. And then we as his people are called to live blamelessly in a warped and crooked generation, because he's our innocent King. What's next? As we keep going through, big word on this one. The transcendent King. Transcendent King. For those who don't know, the word transcendent just means like bigger and above and beyond, right? If there was a thing where everything fits in the box, transcendent is like it's not even in the box, right? It's bigger than that. It's meta to that, right? That's kind of what transcendent means. Jesus is the transcendent king. Here's where we saw it in the passage. Pilate went back inside the palace. He summoned Jesus and he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Right? Pilate is thinking about a potential political conflict here because Pilate's in charge, and is there a king? And this is a worldly political matter. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asks. "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replies. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Pilate's worried about a political rival. He doesn't know half of who Jesus is. What's Jesus' response? "Pilate, you don't need to worry about me wanting to start up government here and get a little militia and try and rule this," right? Jesus isn't trying to gain political power back then. Pilate has completely missed who Jesus truly is. Some of you guys who were here last Sunday got to see some verses from the book of Daniel. Let me show you, for those who missed that, this picture from the Old Testament of who Jesus is, right? Daniel has a vision. "In my vision at night, I looked." This is like 600 years before Jesus was born. "There before me was one like a son of man." That's Jesus' favorite nickname for himself. He clearly, over and over again in all of the Gospels, calls himself this guy, the Son of Man. "Coming with the clouds of heaven, he approached the Ancient of Days," that's God the Father, "was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." And to that guy, Pilate is worried about his own little political situation in the ancient Near East in Jerusalem, right? Pilate cannot wrap his head around who Jesus is. And so the first thing we need to do, I think, is not be like Pilate and underestimate who Jesus is. But to see that Jesus is not just the king of the ancient Jews, right? He's not just someone who was a famous historical figure who had lots of humans follow him and made an impact in the world, right? That Jesus is the transcendent king. Jesus is the King of kings and Lord of lords. That the nature of his kingdom is so far beyond that, like, King Charles is a nobody, a blip in history compared to Jesus and his ruling over not even just the Western world. We fall so easily into the European side of things. Every nation of the world, every culture of the world, not just in the 21st century, but at all times in all of history, that at every single point, anywhere in this world, Jesus has always and will always be the king, right? Not just for as long as his earthly body survives, but into eternity future. That Jesus' kingship is just beyond anything that we could possibly get our heads around. And so we need to recognize him as that. And then if Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, what does it look like? We've got to appreciate that. What does it look like to imitate? This is a slightly different one, right? We don't imitate Jesus in terms of, well, I guess our kingship is of a different world, right? But what did he say? That his kingdom is not of this world. What does it look like for us to say the same thing? My kingdom is not of this world. Is that something that we would echo in our hearts? I think the answer is yes, isn't it? The difference is also, I'm not the king of my kingdom, right? We have a different role to Jesus. He's the king, we're the citizens. But we imitate him, don't we, in that same statement? The kingdom that we belong to is not of this world. The chief identity that we have in our life is not based in this world. Our allegiance is not primarily to anyone or anything in this world. Our obedience is not primarily to anyone in this world. Our hope is not primarily for anything in this world, and our home is not anywhere in this world. That Jesus knew his kingdom is not of this world. And if we are his, then our kingdom, the kingdom to which we belong, is not in this world. What are we told instead? To seek first his kingdom? That our life becomes about participation in his kingdom? Paul writes to the church in Philippi, our citizenship is in heaven. Our citizenship, your citizenship is not first and foremost in Australia if you're an Australian citizen or if you're hoping to become one. That is not the greatest citizenship you could ever have. This is not our primary identity is not as an Australian. Our main allegiance is not to Australia or a different culture that we participate in or come from. Our primary home is not here, and our hope is not here. And that changes everything, even when you start thinking, what do I want to do when I leave school? Where do I want to live? How rich do I want to be? All of those sorts of things, right? This is not our home. This is not our hope. This is not our kingdom. Our kingdom is not of this world, just like his was not of this world. So what does it look like then if his kingdom is not of this world? To seek first his kingdom and to live as citizens of heaven. What's the next thing we see about Jesus the King? A strange one. A strange one. Originally in my notes when I was prepping this up, I had like the sovereign king. And I was like, oh, it's all about Jesus being sovereign. How does that play out for us? Because we're not And then I read the passage a few more times. And you know what? In the passage, Jesus doesn't land on his own authority. Let's have a look what happens when it comes to the question of authority. The Jewish leaders have insisted that he has to die because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he becomes even more afraid, right? What? Jesus says he's the Son of God? He's starting to realize there's something crazy going on with this Jesus guy. He went back inside. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Can you imagine just stonewalling the most powerful person in the ancient world? Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Pilate knows there's more to Jesus. He gets afraid. And then when Jesus is kind of stonewalling him, he then takes the opportunity to flex his authority on Jesus, right? I think his insecurity coming out. Something's going on with this Jesus guy. I'm going to remind him who's in charge here. And what does Jesus do? He calmly defies the most powerful man within 500 kilometers, right? The most powerful man, not just in the capital city that they're in, but in the entire nation. He looks him in the eye and tells him that his power is meaningless. Why does he do that? What does Jesus understand about the authority that's happening in this situation? Well, he actually said it a few chapters earlier. He says, my Father loves me because I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, right? Not Pilate. Pilate doesn't have the power to free him or crucify him. I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. Right? Jesus' authority. But then how's he finish? This command I received from my Father. What's going on for Jesus that leaves him able to stare down the highest authority in the land with calm confidence? He knows who he is because he knows who God is. He knows the role he's been given by God, but he knows that God is over everyone and everything. And so this Pontius Pilate standing in front of him doesn't scare him at all. Not because he's propped up with his own ego or his own authority, but because he knows that God is over all. What's it look like for us to appreciate Jesus then? As the one who, if God is over all, God has then given that authority to him. What does it look like for us in our lives to see Jesus as the one who could look Pontius Pilate in the eye and say, you have no authority over me? What's it look like to see him as the king who is over every earthly ruler? But then, as we see and as we remember that Jesus is above every earthly ruler, as we recognize that, and that starts to shape our heart, what does that lead to for us? What does it look like for us to imitate him? Not by being the one who God has placed in authority, right? That's not true for me, that's not true for you. But to imitate Jesus in recognizing who God is and what God has done with his authority and who we are and who everyone else in the world is. Well, a few different ways I think that plays out. One way is to do what Jesus did and trust in the Lord with all your heart. Jesus doesn't think, oh no, what about this Pilate guy? Maybe he does have enough authority. He trusts God. He says, God is the one who is in all authority now. He's the one who's calling the shots. He's the one whose commands I'm following, and I will trust in him. He already said similar a little while earlier, about a year and a bit earlier, when he was talking to some people and he warned them. He said, "Don't be afraid of those who can kill the body but can't kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." What does Jesus say? Remember, when you're engaging with the authorities of the world, never let God slip out of your view, right? Never stand in front of a boss or your teacher or a deputy or the principal or a policeman or anyone else and bow to their authority, forgetting that Jesus is above them, right? Never become blind to the fact that God is sovereign over all. And so obedience to him trumps obedience to anyone else, no matter how intimidating they are or how powerful they think they are. I think that's part of what it looks like to imitate Jesus here. But there's also, you notice Jesus just had a calmness, right? A confidence, a serenity standing in front of the most powerful man in the known world for him at the moment. Because not only do we need to remember that God is the one who we should rightly fear, but actually, Paul writes to the Romans, if God is that powerful, what should we say? If God is for us, then who could be against us? If God is that powerful that all humans should rightly fear him, and God has turned his heart towards us with love, then what do we have to be afraid of? Don't we see that in King Jesus? As he submitted to the Father, he had no fear of Pilate. Maybe there's ways that we can imitate him. Maybe you have little opportunities in your life as well to trust in God the Father, to trust in Jesus, to submit to them, and then have a quiet confidence in the face of any powers or authorities that might ever threaten us worshipping him. That's the submitting king. Now the big kind of obvious but glorious ones. Jesus, the rejected king. It's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover, Pilate says. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? Surely I'll set Jesus free because there's nothing wrong. He's innocent, he's innocent. But they shout, no, not him. Give us Barabbas, a guy who was a rebel who'd taken part in an uprising and surely got a bunch of people killed when you try an uprising against the Roman Empire. An opportunity to set Jesus free, and the crowd shouts, no, don't free him, free a convicted murderer instead. And as if that rejection wasn't enough. Skip forward to chapter 19. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. And he was correct because Jesus was their king, because Jesus is God. And what did they say? They shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. Rejected by his own people. Jesus, the rejected king of the Jews. Actually, in fulfillment of something that had been said 1,000 years earlier, this is kind of poetic, metaphoric, you can deep dive on it later. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, right? If you're building a building, the cornerstone is the one that everything else is built off. What was this prophecy about? That there is someone that God would build everything based on. They would be the foundation of everything, but first they would be rejected. And we see in Jesus him being rejected. Why? That's what happened. Why does it matter? He was being rejected so that we might be accepted by God. He was rejected by us so that we might be accepted by God. What's it look like for us to appreciate this part of Jesus' kingship? Well, I actually think on this one it's appreciating the fact that we're not all that different to the Jews a lot of the time. That when Jesus is presented to us as our king, it's very easy for us to say, he's not my king. Now, we don't actually say that. We don't say, I have no king but Caesar. But we do choose something else in our life and say, I'm going to obey it instead, right? I've got this other desire that I have, and it's going to be my king. I've got this other priority in my life, and it's going to be my king. All the time, I think we reject Jesus as king, the same way that those Jews did. But you know what is crazy in this situation? Who was Caesar to them? The conquering oppressor of their people. The reality is, and this is true for you guys, your friends, this is true for all of us. When we reject Jesus as king, we accept something else as king. When we say, he is not my king, we turn and we obey something else. And the thing that we turn to is never a good king. The kings of this world are oppressors, enslave us. When we choose to make ourselves a slave to capitalism and money and greed, it's not a better king than Jesus. When we make ourselves a slave to the social opinion of all of the people around us to try and impress them, that's not a king that brings freedom. It's an oppressive king that destroys us. Those Jews all those years ago rejected Jesus and turned instead to a king that would oppress them. And in our hearts we do the same thing every week. So the first thing I think is to appreciate Jesus as a king who ought not be rejected, but is a king that brings life and freedom. The second thing though, what does it look like if he's the rejected king? What's it look like to imitate him? First appreciate him, then what's it look like to imitate him? So I'll try clicking that a few more times, or I might need help from up the back. Thank you. Blessed are you, Jesus says to his people, when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Jesus says that he was rejected and his people will be rejected. Rejoice and be glad, he says, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That if Jesus was the rejected king, firstly, we accept him and are accepted by him. Secondly, we're called to face rejection from the world just like he did. Last one. Put in number 6. Jesus the suffering king. Not at all what you expect from a king, but what you know King Jesus did. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together the crown. At the first time Jesus wears a crown, it's a crown made of thorns, and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe. They went up to him again and again, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. Jesus the suffering king. Why? Because of that mission that he's been on for 700 years and all eternity. That says that he was pierced for our transgressions. You guys know this from Isaiah 53. Go back and read it if you want to understand Jesus better. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. That's the things we've done wrong. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds, what's it say? Why did he go through it? Why did he get flogged? Why did he get slapped in the face? Why did he get whipped? Why did he get beaten? Because by his wounds we are healed. What happened? He was flogged, beaten, and tortured. Why? So that by his wounds we might be healed. What's it look like to appreciate him? To think of the humiliation, the mockery, and the torture. I don't know if I was put in a situation where someone had, I don't know, taken a friend or someone in my life, was threatening them and started to torture me and gave me a button to tap out. I don't know how much torture I could endure for the good of a friend. I like to think that it would be heaps, but I don't know. Think about what Jesus went through out of love for you. The suffering king, that he did that as our king. What's it look like as we get close to Easter to appreciate that? And then, as well as appreciating it, what's the second thing we're doing? Imitating it. What's it look like to imitate our king? 1 Peter says it's better if it's God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. It's better to suffer if it's God's will for doing good. Why? For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. That is, he was perfect, we are not, to bring us to God. What does Peter say? Christ suffered to bring us to God, and so it is right for us to suffer for following him. James says, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. That when there are difficulties in our life, when we are going through times like we've seen Jesus on trial, right? That patient endurance of that suffering is following in our Saviour's footsteps that ultimately lead us to what? The crown of life that he has promised us. Jesus was mocked, had a crown of thorns jammed on his head, and he endured that shame for your salvation. And so it's right for us to be transformed, isn't it, by gratitude to him. And transformed by gratitude for him, we then persevere under trial, looking to him as our inspiration and holding on to him as our anchor. There are 6 things that we see about Jesus tonight. Him, the dignified king, the innocent king, the transcendent, the submitting, the rejected, and the suffering king. We're going to go to small groups, and I want you guys to look at Jesus and talk about, firstly, what does it look like with those 6 things for you to appreciate him? What impact does it have on your life if you appreciate that that's who King Jesus is? That when he finally puts on a crown, it's a crown of thorns for us. What's it look like to appreciate him? How might that lead you to worship him in your life, right? And what does it look like for you to imitate him? To demonstrate him to the world, to show the world what King Jesus is like, while we look forward to the day when his kingdom is fully revealed and his kingdom is all that we enjoy for eternity. But while we await that, what does it look like to live like our King Jesus? I'm going to pray. You guys are going to go and chat about that for 15 minutes. King Jesus, thank you that you are not at all like King Charles or any other king this world has ever seen. Please reshape our hearts by your kingship. Help us to see you in humiliation and apparent powerlessness and appreciate you as the King walking through those things for us. Help us to see your character and love you. And then, Jesus, please work in us so that as we appreciate you and as we love you, we might imitate you. Help us to have conversations that lead to that by the power of your Spirit tonight. And we ask it in your name. Amen.